Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel, 3 Stories. This is Zsuzsi and today's video is a spring reading wrap-up video. I should say one of my spring reading wrap-up videos because I read insane amount of fantasy this spring, particularly fantasy romance. I think a total of 20 books, but I reread a couple of those books, so you know, the number is like up there. So I decided to make a fantasy edition for my spring reading wrap-up. Now let's get to this wrap-up, starting with the books, the series that started it all, started this whole fantasy romance journey. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I read the entire series and I vlogged that experience. I have 2 vlogs that I will link down below if you want to check that out. But because obviously, you know, in a series, one book builds on the other one and has the potential to spoil the entire series, and I want to keep this video spoiler free, I am not going to go into in-depth discussion of the individual books. I think I will just describe the world to you and some of my thoughts about the series. Okay, so book 1, A Court of Thorns and Roses. Feyre, our protagonist, while hunting in the woods near where she lives, she kills a wolf. But that wolf was no ordinary wolf, it was a fairy that dwelled on the other side of this invisible wall that separates the mortal realm from the fairy land called Prythian. By killing this wolf, she actually violates like a hundreds of years old treaty. And because of that, a beast named Tamlin shows up at her door and demands her life in exchange for the wolf's or the fairy's life. Feyre has to follow him to Prythian, to the Spring Court specifically, to live out the remaining of her years on his estate in the Spring Court. And first, Feyre is not happy about this situation because she thought that she would be like the slave for this beast. But then it turns out that this beast is like, you know, a gorgeous high fae, actually the high lord of the Spring Court, and he's super handsome and he's super strong and he's like, you know, super everything. So then this whole situation becomes very enjoyable for Feyre and she grows very attracted to him. But there is a magical blight, a magical curse going on in Prythian that does not only threaten Prythian but also the mortal lands and Feyre's family. And Feyre must face these impossible trials and a very evil villain called Amaranta to prove her love for Tamlin and to be the savior of all. Now, in the upcoming books, this world expands. We get to know Prythian and the different courts in Prythian, not only the Spring Court, and we get to know a lot of different characters. We get to know a lot of different relationships, friendships, as well as romantic relationships, and they are all so precious. I love the side characters. I liked our protagonists as well, but mostly the side characters. And I said it in my vlog videos, and I say it again, that Lucian, as far as characters go, is the best, and he is my favorite. He is everything. He is my babe. And I do believe that the next book in the series, because this series is not finished, he will get a major role in that book, and I cannot wait for that. I think that Sarah J. Maas created a very fun and a very rich world. Like Prythian, honestly, I want to go there. It sounds actually super fun. And I like the characters, the fairies or the fae, because this was my first book, like really learning something about the fae. And now I know that they are, you know, very witty, very pranksy and tricksy, and that interpersonal like relationships that they have with each other, that's like 100 in my opinion. And they are so funny and I am totally here for it. I like that her characters are actually really flawed, and there is a lot of character work in this series. I like that they are not good, but they are also not pure evil. There is a little bit of good and there is a little bit of bad in every single one of them, and I think that makes them very human-like. With regard to the actual writing, because I know that Sarah J. Maas receives a lot of criticism, or gets, not necessarily receives, but gets a lot of criticism regarding her writing, I think it's fine. Like, this is advertised as young adult and new adult, and I think that her writing is fine. She tends to end the chapters on a cliffhanger, so you know, you immediately want to start the next chapter, and then you immediately want to start the next book. Pacing is usually not off. There are no, like, you know, super long flowery descriptions, nothing like that. I think that the way she writes is very easy and very readable. There's a reason why she sold millions of copies. I think that she created a fantastic series, and I think you can tell, and I've mentioned this before, you can tell that you read a good book when you don't want to finish it. When you don't want to finish the book, when you don't want to finish the series, when you cannot wait for the other book to come out because you are so invested in the characters and you are so invested in the world that you just want to know what happens next. My favorite book in the series is the first one, because this is the one that introduced this whole world to me, the fairies and Prythian. And I also really like the fifth book, A Court of Silver Flames, because that was an amazing character study of one of Feyre's sisters, and the connection was truly there between me and the book. So I think those are my two favorites, but the whole series is fantastic. I can highly recommend. If you've never read it, or if you don't read even fantasy romance, or even if you don't read fantasy, I recommend this series because it's so easy to read. The characters and the world, they are fantastic. You will not regret picking it up. After I finished ACOTAR, I picked up a fantasy romance duology. These Hollow Vows and These Twisted Bonds by Lexi Ryan. And oh boy, I should have listened to the author, and I should have listened to this title, because yes, this book was hollow and this book was way too twisted. So again, about the world. Our main protagonist is Brie, or Briella, which I think is a very special and a beautiful name. And she's always felt comfortable in the shadows. She can blend in with the night, which basically makes her into a perfect thief. Now, she doesn't like to break in and she doesn't like to steal, but this is the only way to support herself and her sister, because they have a very serious debt to pay off to their aunt. When she cannot complete this payment, her aunt sells her sister Jazz to the very wicked fairy king of the Unseelie court. Briella, or Brie, she's super desperate to get her sister back, so she goes to the Unseelie court and she makes a deal with the Unseelie king. She has to retrieve 3 magical objects that this king needs, and then she can get her sister back. Now, this is fantasy romance, and this is young adult fantasy romance, at least that's how it's advertised. So of course we have a love triangle. We have 2 male characters. One of them is Finn, who is like an Unseelie fairy, and then who's the other one? Sebastian, who is like a prince in another court, and we just get into, like, you know, this whole love triangle thing. And what I didn't like about the love triangle is that this whole book basically centered around that. I felt that the plot was like very mediocre, and whenever a character had to make a decision, Briella had to make a decision, it was always based on love and this whole love triangle situation and nothing else. The first half of this book was very weak, in my opinion. I didn't really get the world building. There was not really world building, to be honest. A lot of things were predictable in the plot, and even like, you know, I saw the twists coming, so there were not that many surprises in this book. And honestly, like, I don't understand how they can advertise this as young adult, because if the ACOTAR series from Sarah J Maas is young adult, then compared to that, like, this is basically middle grade. Okay, like it does have some like sexy scenes in there, but other than that, it's like it's middle grade. I really didn't enjoy. And that was the first book. And then the second book, These Twisted Bonds, it was so twisted. I don't want to tell you what this is about. I cannot, because I don't want to spoil the first book, obviously. But even if I wanted to tell you what that book was about, honestly, I would really struggle filming that. Then I read a couple of standalone fantasy books, starting with Siren Queen by Guy Wu. And honestly, I think that this was a really good book. I heard people describing this as the dark fantasy version of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And I think that it's partially true, because this book is dark, magical, lesbian. We have the LA vibes, because in this world we get a very old Hollywood that is ruled by literal monsters through dark magic and blood rituals. So this was, yeah, really dark LA vibes. It is 1930 in this book, and Luli Wei, she's a Chinese American from Hungarian Hill, so, you know, connection there. And she is desperate to become an actress, and she would do anything for stardom and just to see herself rise on the social ladder and to become a star. She doesn't care if she has to sell her soul. Now, this book, just like I expected, it's a very heavy criticism of the modern day Hollywood. We talk about sexism, we talk about racism, we talk about the LGBTQ rights. I really liked it. This is a standalone, and this is what I needed at the time. And yeah, I recommend this book. And following that, the next standalone that I read is An Enchantment of Ravens. And I read the physical book as well as the audio version for this. And the audio version is actually narrated by Julia Whelan. So you know that this is gonna be a really, really good audio book. So what happens in this book? Our protagonist, human protagonist, is Isabel, and she lives in the town of Whimsy. The fairy folk, or the fays, they often come to Whimsy to trade with the humans. They trade enchantments for craft, because fays cannot create. They can only create illusions, and they can only glamour themselves, but they cannot craft. They cannot do baking. They cannot do cooking or stitching or whatever, you name it. And Isabel, she is a painter, so she actually paints the portraits of these fairies that come to visit her. And one day, Rook, the autumn prince, shows up at Isabel's doorstep, and she has to paint his portrait. She is an extremely good painter, but struggles with painting specifically Rook's eyes. And when she sends the painting off, and it turns out that she painted sorrow into Rook's eyes, and because of that the other fairies see him weak, that gets him really, really angry. So he kidnaps Isabel to take her to court for her crime. But as they travel in the autumn court, they become targets of the wild hunt. It is an autumn court things. And instead of enemies, they now have to become allies. And of course, we will get a love story. Isabel is a wonderful female lead character in this book. She's very smart, she's clever, she's down to earth, she's intelligent, and she is a total opposite of Rook. Because Rook is a typical fae male. He's very arrogant, he's very protective, and he doesn't know anything about human customs. Their whole interaction, I think, is really, really funny. There were chapters and paragraphs when I laughed so hard, and that is because of Rook. He is really, really immature in this book. When it comes to fantasy books and fantasy romance and fairies specifically, that we always get the description how beautiful they are and how strong they are, and like humans, always want to be them. But in this book, the author describes them a little bit differently, because the world and the description that she gives about the autumn court, for example, it's beautiful and the colors are so rich. But when it comes to the fairies specifically, she shows that fairies are actually really complex creatures. They are very flawed. The courts decay. Fairies have no empathy, and humans in general, they just do not know in advance what they are getting into when they are dealing with fairies. I recommend this book. I love the world, I love the colors, I love the characters. It was also super funny. Rook is one of my favorite male character now, so I recommend. And I also recommend the audiobook because Julia Whelan did a really, really good job. And now let's discuss Crescent City, the other series that I finished from Sarah J. Maas this spring, and oh boy, it did not disappoint. This was so good. It's almost just as good as ACOTAR. I cannot believe I say that. It's very different from ACOTAR, but just as good as ACOTAR. So our protagonist is Bryce Quinlan. I love that name, by the way. And she is half fae and half human, and she lives in Lunathian, or otherwise known as Crescent City. And Crescent City is a modern city with modern technologies, but it is full with humans and fays and archangels and shifters, deer shifters, wolf shifters, vampires, mermaids, like everything that you can imagine. All these mythical and mystical creatures, they are there in Lunathian. Bryce has a pretty normal life, though she is half human. She works for an antiquities dealer by day, and by night she is basically a party girl with her best friend Danica. She has no worries in the world until one night something truly, truly terrible happens. A demon kills her dearest friends and basically shakes the foundation of the city. And then 2 years later, a murder in the same fashion happens in the city, and Bryce needs to get involved with this investigation. And the archangel that she needs to conduct this investigation with, who is basically also her bodyguard, is Hunt Athalar, who wants nothing to do with her, at least not first. Okay, wow. So first, let's discuss the world. This story takes place in a modern city when there is, just like I said, modern technologies, but also there is magic and there is all these mystical and mythical creatures, and I didn't understand how this could come together. And when I started reading this book, I admit it, I had to put it down first. I read 30 pages and I said, I don't understand this. I have to put it down. I have to come back to this because I cannot comprehend what is happening in this book. I don't understand the world. But you just gotta push through those initial pages because you will get into it. Sarah J. Maas's writing is so easy and so captivating that you will get into this book and you will understand the world. Bryce and Hunt Athalar, they are the main characters in the first book, but we also get to see other side characters. For example, Bryce's half brother, Rune, who is my favorite character, at least in the first book. And Lahaba. Can we just mention Lahaba, the smutty fire sprite? I think I like her more than Rune, actually. Yeah, I'm changing it. Lahaba, she was my favorite character. And then in the second book, we get to see even more side characters. Now, this book gets chaotic in terms of the world building, but it is so, so good. And the side characters, like Rune in this one and Tyrion in this one, they are my favorite characters. Now, this is, as you can see, is actually a workout like Sarah Janet. Again, like we get these 800 pages and 97 chapters long books. I know that it is intimidating, but do not be intimidated, because once you get into the world, it will be a book that you've never read before and a world that you've never seen before. I'm sorry, I've never seen before. I really enjoyed. If you are somebody who enjoys fantasy, and enjoy a little bit of darker fantasy, because there is a murder going on here and there is a crime and investigation, then I think that you will really like this series. It's got all the typical fantasy elements, but in a technologically advanced world. I highly, highly recommend ACOTAR and Crescent City. Best. The audiobook narrator in both books is Elizabeth Evans. She is fantastic, fantastic. Her voice and how she narrates the audiobooks, fantastic. Oh, it's getting really dark outside. There is a storm coming, so sorry about the noise. So you think that Sarah J. Maas writes smut? You think that? Well, let me introduce you to From Blood and Ash. So I read every single book in that series, the original series From Blood and Ash, but it is still an ongoing series. But now she is starting to publish the books of the prequel, and I also read that. And just like with ACOTAR, I don't want to spoil anything, so I will describe the first book and I will describe the world itself, which is in my opinion very interesting. So the first book, From Blood and Ash. Now don't ask me why the format of this book is different than the other ones in the series. I cannot answer that. Anyways, but this book, I think it was really good and it totally got me hooked on this series. So our protagonist, Penelope, or Poppy, let's call her Poppy because I like that name way more. So Poppy is a maiden who's been in isolation ever since she was born, and she is waiting for her 17th birthday, I think, when she will ascend and she will start serving the gods, because that is the purpose that she was bred for. She barely leaves her room. She has to wear a veil and she has to wear white, and she doesn't have any friends. She is not allowed to make friends, really. And then one night she sneaks out just to have, you know, a little bit of a life. So she goes to this tavern called the Red Pearl, and there is a booklet in the series that is called the Red Pearl. That's why I'm specifically mentioning it, and it's like a very famous scene. She goes there and then she meets a mysterious guy named Hawk. They make out a little bit, but then nothing happens. And then it turns out that this Hawk Flynn, will actually become her personal guard, and she will have to spend some time with him. She is becoming, of course, increasingly attracted to him, but that's not what this is all about, because she also has to discover all the secrets that surrounds her duties and the kingdom that she's currently living in. And this series, this book itself, but the entire series, this was wild. It got wild. This was not what I expected. We have vampires here, we have werewolves, and the story and the plot went in a direction that I did not expect at all, but I really, really enjoyed. In my opinion, this is the first book is the best book in the series. The follow-up books are not that great. I think they are getting weaker and weaker. but nonetheless, the world I enjoy very much. Let's discuss the characters first. Poppy, I think she's a very strong and resilient female lead. She has emotional tolerance, and whenever she has to face her shortcomings, she just faces them and she takes them positively. And to me, it was like such a great trait to see in a female main character. And the male main character, Hawk, Flynn, or Castile Denier, well, I think that he's been described as the boyfriend that everybody wants. And I don't know, I think I need to agree with that, because he is, he's very loving, but he's also very selfish. He's very caring, but he's also very demanding. It seems like that there is just no way to get bored with him or get bored of him. I enjoyed that he was a male lead who was more than just gorgeous. Like, he actually had a role and he participated in the plot. He was not just there because, oh, you're beautiful and you're muscular and I really like looking at you and doing other things. I love the romance. It is a slow burn romance, but I'm a slow burn romance kind of girl. And when we get there, I really liked it. What I like about this book so much is the world. The first couple of pages in the book, they feel very slow, to be honest, especially when it comes to the characters and when it comes to the romance. But I understand that because we need to build a world in here. And this world, just like I said, was not what I expected. And I really had to pay attention because I'm like, okay, this is getting a little bit this is getting a little bit complicated. But then once I understood the world, I really enjoyed it. I like that in this book, and this is not really a major spoiler, but I like that in this book the enemy that we're fighting are gods and primals. It is not just about disagreements between humans or immortals or different mythical and mystical creatures. No, it's like everything is happening on a much bigger scale, on a higher level, because we're talking about gods. And they are presumably not that easy to kill. And as long as we're talking about gods, the prequel. Only 2 books have been published, and the first one is A Shadow in the Ember. And this is where basically the gods and the primals come into the picture, and we get to see a little bit more about them and we get to understand them. I read the prequel first before I read the original series. I don't think it matters. I understood the world either way. I think you can do it either way. Now, this book and this story, or this particular series, start out very similarly to From Blood and Ash, because we have Seraphina, who was raised in isolation since her birth, because her ancestor made a deal with the father of the primal of death that when she becomes of age, then she will marry the primal of death and become his consort. She is not well protected like the maiden because they trained her to become an assassin, because the idea was that she gets married to the primal of death and then she seduces him, she becomes the weakness of him, and then she kills him. And they hope that when he dies, then this magical rot that is destroying the land, that will stop, because humans at this stage are really suffering and they are not able to grow their corpse and everybody is getting sick. What I enjoyed in this book is the world. Again, I have to give the author credit for the world, gods and primals, and drakons. Drakons, this is not a spoiler. There is a drakon or a drakon eye on the cover of the book. And these drakons were, to me, the protagonists of the book. You give me drakons and you give me dragons and I'm good. I don't need protagonists. I really like the male protagonist, Nyktos, the primal of death. I think he was precious. I really liked him. But what I really didn't like, and it was hard for me to get through this book is because of the female main character, Serafina or Sarah. She was incredibly annoying. You know, sometimes authors do this, that they think that they will make their female protagonist extra strong and resilient by making them so incredibly headstrong that it becomes annoying. Like every time when somebody tells her, do not go out there because those creatures like threaten your life, of course I'm gonna go out there and like, oh, whatever, I kill those creatures. I don't like that just because you're headstrong and you endanger other people because of that, that doesn't mean that you're a strong and resilient woman. So I wish authors stopped doing that. I think that was a really big mistake. In the second book, she did tone that down a little bit, which I appreciated, but in the first book, it's definitely there. It was a little bit hard to get through, but the way Jennifer L. Armentrout ends her books, it's really like, I know that it's, you know, it's about publishing strategy, but basically when she ends one of the book, then the next one picks up from that exact same scene. So you kind of want to know the continuation immediately. So every single books in this series end on a cliffhanger. And yes, I will continue this series. But just like I said, it is getting gradually worse. And in the original series From Blood and Ash, some smut, because just like I said, this is extremely smutty, some smut and some descriptions, maybe I'm just prude, I don't know, it's possible, it did make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I felt that, okay, this is a little bit too much. If you like strong female characters, if you like male characters who do more than just being gorgeous, if you like dragons, vampires, werewolves, gods and primals, I think that this is the series for you. Okay, now next, let's talk about Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I don't have this book. I don't have this book because I cannot source this book. I went to so many different bookstores here in Boston. They don't have it, all sold out. I couldn't order it online. I couldn't get it from Amazon. On Amazon, I have to wait 2 months to get this book. Like, what's happening? When I originally came across this book and I looked it up on Goodreads, it was crazy. It's just like 5-star reviews everywhere. Like, wait, where is this book coming from? Like, did I even know that this book was gonna get published in 2023? And it's about dragons, and if it's about dragons, I know about it. And I don't remember it, like what's happening? So of course I had to check out this book. I must say, before I get into like detailed descriptions, that this book is really, really good, and I am picking up the next book, and then I don't know, maybe the next book. I don't know how many books are in the series. I am picking it up, but I think that this book was very overhyped and it didn't help the book. Okay, so what is this book about? 20-year-old Violet Sorrengail, I love her name, by the way, she wants to become a scribe. Scribes are basically librarians and historians, and this is what she's been wanting in her entire life. But her mother and her entire family, like her sisters and now that brothers, they are all military people, and they are dragon riders, and her mother is the commander of the dragon riders, and her mother basically pushes her into being a dragon rider. She is not built to become a dragon rider. She has some chronic illnesses. She was born with chronic illness. She's very, very small, so she cannot even mount a dragon. She never wanted to do that, but now she has to enter this school and try to survive, because this school, we see death in this book like on a whole new scale, because everybody dies. She has to rely on her brain and on her wits, which is something that we do see throughout the book, and I really, really appreciated it. And it's a fantasy romance, of course, and there is somebody called Xaden Ryerson, who is, of course, a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous man that she will get involved with. When it comes to fantasy, I'm sure that you guys will agree with this. And then you start reading a new fantasy, it is so hard to get into it because you don't understand the world. If there's no map, then you don't even understand, okay, like how does this world look like? What are the creatures? What are the places? What are the languages? Like, I don't understand anything. So sometimes it can be hard, but not in this book. Like Rebecca Yarros, I think, did an excellent job with the world building, but that is what this book is. The first book, it has very minimal plot or no plot really. It is all about world building so that we understand what is happening. And the dragons, the dragons are certainly part of this world, and to me the dragons were the protagonists. I don't care about Violet, I don't care about Xaden, I don't even care about the other side characters. I wanted dragon content and it did not disappoint. The dragons were amazing and I loved them. But as far as the other characters go, and not just the dragons, I really like the relationships in the book, not just the romantic relationship between Violet and Xaden, which is a very slow burn romance. So again, I love slow burn. I just want you to know that it is slow burn. But it is not just about their romantic relationship. It is also about the friendships that Violet makes in that school. And in the end, I did cry. I did cry a little bit for one of the side characters because the side characters are also really, really amazing. There was one thing that annoyed me in this book, and it's not necessarily the lack of plot, because I think that in the second book she will make up for that, but I really didn't like Violet's character in certain situations, because she was a very strong female character and very resilient and very headstrong, and in this book there was nothing wrong with that. But when it came to her relationship with Xaden, she became a little bit annoying and a little bit needy, which I didn't like. I had to listen to the audio version and it was immediately available for my library. I didn't even have to wait for that. And I don't know if the audio, affected my opinion about this book, because I must say that the narrator does an excellent job. Like her voice, I think her name is Rebecca Soler, I would say. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, and she has a very unique voice, and as far as the narration goes, I think she did an excellent job. But Violet is supposed to be 20-year-old and Rebecca's voice is way more mature than that, and because of that, to me the audio was a little bit off. But nonetheless, it is a book that I recommend. If you like dragons, I think that this is a must read. And then another book, another standalone fantasy that I finished this spring is Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. And I really enjoyed this one. This was advertised as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and since the first ACOTAR book was also advertised as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, I knew that I had to pick this up, and it did not disappoint. Of course, it's like completely different, but this did not disappoint. So as far as the plot goes, our main character is Nyx, and ever since she was born, she was bred for one purpose, and that is to kill the evil ruler of her homeland. So on her 17th birthday, she leaves everything behind and marries, becomes the wife of the immortal Ignifax. But Ignifax is not exactly what Nyx expected. Ignifax was not what I expected. And as Nyx is trying to find a way to kill him, and she's trying to find a way to free her homeland, she actually uncovers secrets, and then she realizes, Ignifax might not be a villain at all. And of course, she becomes drawn to him, of course. This was a very intricate tale and I enjoyed the world itself. This is not a very long book, but this book to me was about the characters and specifically about Ignifax. I adored Ignifax. I love him so much. He is sassy. Woo! Even when Nyx tries to kill him, because that's the reason why she marries him, like he thinks that it's funny, and he's got all these very flirtatious responses when his life is threatened. I love this book and I highly recommend. I also finished the second book in the Wayward's Children series, and this is by Shannon Maguire, and this is the second book in that installment, Down Among the Sticks and Bones. And just in case you don't know, this series, it's a collection of novellas. Each book, they are very short, and they all follow the journey of children who ventured into magical lands. So this is basically a fantasy portal series. Each of these worlds that they venture into, they match the children way better than our world, and they don't want to come home, but eventually they have to. And when they come home, they don't really know what to do with themselves. They want to go back to that magical world that fitted them so well. And because they don't know how to cope, they can all find refuge at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. I think that's the name of the school. I read the first book sometime during the winter, and now I finished this one. And this book follows two characters, Jack and Jill, that we were introduced to in the first book, and now we get to see their background story and we understand their motivations that we didn't really understand in the first book. So this was a natural continuation to the first book. I like this book. Her writing is beautiful, and I think the series, although I've only read two little novellas, so you know, not much opinion about the series as a whole. I enjoy this series, but I don't really understand the hype around this series. But of course, I will continue it. She is an amazing writer and the stories are really unique. These novellas tell the stories of becoming an adult and losing your innocence and losing a certain sense of idealism. And I find it very interesting, and the writing is beautiful. The world she creates, although it's just a couple of hundreds of pages, is really great. But I don't get the general hype around this series. Maybe when I finish it, I will understand it. I don't know. I enjoy, but I'm not like dying to continue the series. And this is it. This is the end of the video, of this video, as far as the fantasy edition of my spring reading wrap-up goes. I will be back with another video where I discuss all the fiction and all the non-fiction books that I read this spring. As always, I am very appreciative that you watched this video, that you joined me for today's video. Hit like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in another video coming very soon. Bye.